Hello and welcome back to Cherie and Elizabeth Talk Sports. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of Strides Forward, a podcast about women and running. And I'm here with Elizabeth Emery, who is the host and producer of Hear Her Sports. And let's get things started, Elizabeth, by hearing about what's on your mind this week.
Well, what's on my mind this week is Jessie Diggins winning silver yesterday in the 30-kilometer freestyle skate at the Olympics. And it was just such an extraordinary race. Just watching her it just blew my mind. And then to find out later that she had just recovered from food poisoning is that much more incredible. But along with that, I thought about the coverage, the commentary at the Olympics. You know, I've been watching more sports that I don't normally watch. So it was really interesting to see how the commentary was. And, you know, there were definitely some were better than others. And so then I thought, like, what do I want from commentary? And I want to be treated like an intelligent person, but I want to be given, you know, interesting details about the sport. But it depends on what I'm watching, because I watched the bobsleigh and I don't know anything about bobsleigh. So, you know, what I wanted to know was a reminder of how those machines are steered. And when I was watching cross-country skiing, which I know a lot more about, I wanted to know details about tactics and, you know, about their fueling, because they were getting bottles on the side of the trail. So it's super hard. You know, you have to balance the person that knows a ton and the person who doesn't know that much. But it is really interesting. I mean, I will have to say that the commentators during the cross-country skiing really got super basic and seemed to be struggling with things to say, even during this amazing, amazing race. You know, like it reminded me of it reminded me of my softball coach in high school, who we still joke about, you would get up to the plate to hit the ball and she would say, "Hit the ball."
Thanks.
Right. So it sort of reminded me of that, you know, like there was one point where she's saying, you know, like if the skiers that want to win really have to go fast. I mean, it was like the equivalent of that. I'm making fun a little bit, but it was a little more basic, and there's so much room for improvement. But I did start to wonder, you know, like, okay, what's it like in sports that are sort of more popular, like football and baseball and basketball? But the problem with those sports is everyone already knows the basics. I mean, I know nothing about those sports, and I know about those sports. And it reminded me of pre-Hear Her Sports days when I was listening to The Fan during a commute. During that time, it was in 2015, and, you know, the Cavaliers were really popular. And you know, they don't waste time on basics of the game. You know, they jump right to, you know, who's shooting good 3-pointers and things like that. And I followed along. You know, I'm able to follow along because it's repetitive and stuff like that. So it made me think a lot about how to cover sports better.
Right. And I do think about that myself when I'm listening to commentators talk about a sport that I'm really familiar with. And I'm just like, gosh, this information is just so basic. But I do think that they can bring along people who don't know that much by just filling in some details along the way. I really don't think they need to keep it super basic.
I don't either.
All the time. Yeah, that's annoying. And I think especially with something like a race that Diggins is in, like there's just so much information about her out there, and just do more homework. Like find out what captivates you about this sport and tell that to your audience. And I understand it's got to be a lot harder than just that, but that's their job as well. So right, it's like, right. do the hard work. Yeah. So I've got to think that there's a way to navigate that and to be able to do it really well. Like I would be hard pressed to think that somebody couldn't jump into, say, Phil Liggett talking about the Tour de France and not be totally captivated by his commentary right off the bat. And he knows that race inside out. He knows the racers inside out. He's been he'd been commentating forever, and I think he could bring anyone along. So I think that you could say that about anybody who does their job well in a particular sport. So
I agree.
Yeah.
It also, like, I think too that maybe because they usually have two commentators, that like one person could be sort of the simple person, one could be sort of the more advanced, and, they're going back and forth and having a discussion about it.
Right. Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. And, it's interesting that you bring up sports coverage and also somebody's great performance, because that's exactly what I'm going to talk about, but not the same performance or the same sport at all.
Right.
The big news in ultra running this last weekend was that Camille Herron bettered her 100-mile world record over the weekend at the USATF National Championships in the 100-mile. And along the way, she set a bunch of other records too. She broke her own 12-hour record. She set the age group world record for the 50-mile. And yeah, she just had an absolutely incredible performance. And she won outright. So she was the first finisher of the national championships for the 100-miler. Yeah. And she had some very, very worthy competition on both the men's and women's side. Like, it was a packed house and she just absolutely crushed it. I will say she beat her own record by 1 minute and 29 seconds. So it's not like she's shaving huge amounts of time off these records, because they're already so stout and she's the one who made them. So they're really hard to break already. And yeah, she just crushed it. And she averaged, so you would think, like, over this long period of time, like, the average must be fairly not like a high pace. 7:37-minute miles over 100 miles. Yeah. These are incredibly difficult records. Yeah. So yeah, so she did absolutely incredible. And the other thing I was going to point out was that the media coverage was really good. It's through an organization. Their parent organization is Aravaipa Running, and they put on events, and they also do a lot of commentary. And so they were providing commentary through their channel, Steep Life Media. And once again, they just provided great content. They were recording live for hours and hours and hours, like they do, because they cover long distance running events. And their coverage is just so even-handed. They get super excited about everybody who is out there, and especially, the people who are going after records. And they know the runners. They have guest commentators come on throughout because, they've got a lot of airtime to fill. And they just do a phenomenal job. And that's cool. So, yeah, it's really exciting to see. And it is a sport dominated by men. And, comes out of, the larger running community, which is still largely dominated by men in terms of, like, coverage, as we always see, even though participation is pretty even. Yeah. So anyways, so they did a great job. It was super exciting to watch. I didn't watch the finish live, but you could go back to YouTube and watch it because she finished it, quite early in the morning for me. So yeah, so it was very exciting.
So what did they fill the time with? Like, since we're talking about a particular sport, I mean, how did they do that? How did they explain the sport, maybe?
Oh, goodness. So they have a few different things going on. And I will say, I didn't watch the whole thing. So I kind of pop in and out. Yeah. They'll focus on what's going on at that particular time. They'll talk about the runners who are maybe in the lead, or what other people are up to who are maybe front runners in the race. And they have a number of different locations. So they have their in-studio location. They also have people who are out on the course. And then they also have people who are like out on the course at the main aid station, because this was a loop course. So they have the main aid area. So they would have some commentators out there. They would have people who are literally on the course following some of the different runners and maybe even talking to them if that was appropriate. So they just and they have like charts that they do and graphs that they talk about, and about, like what pace somebody might be going and how that's changing over time, and looking at it compared to other people. And, they've developed these different ways of talking about the sport over time because they're covering it so much. Sure. And they get a lot of nice commentary. There'll be, pretty well-known runners within the community are popping into the chat forum. So they'll talk about things that those people are saying. So they do tend to, they keep it pretty lively. So yeah, it's really impressive. Yeah. So maybe let's move on to the episode of the week that we're
Sure.
highlighting. It
Yeah.
is, I'm very excited about it. It's from my podcast, Strides Forward. I just put it out over the weekend, and it is featuring Olympic UK marathoner Sonia Samuels, and she's sort of in conversation with Jay Grunke of the Balanced Runner. And Jay is a Feldenkrais practitioner and running form expert. And the story covers Sonia's entire running journey from when she fell in love with running by watching the Olympics, Barcelona, and announced that she wanted to be an Olympian. And her whole family was sort of like, "Oh, okay, Sonia, that's lovely," because she was a child, she was a kid at the time, and through to the fact that she does end up going to the Olympics. She went to Rio at 38 years old. And then she hits this period of having lots of injuries and getting pretty burnt out on the sport, almost gets to the point where she's going to quit. She's trying everything to try and remedy these issues she's having. And she gets introduced to Jay Grunke, who helps runners find better form and become more skillful runners, as Jay terms it. Jay likes to talk about running as an actual skill sport, that we need to learn how to run skillfully. And it has their journey about how Jay helped Sonia return to pain-free running and sort of re-find her joy of running. And now, and it ends with where she's at today, which is as the mom of a toddler. So in this period of time, she also has had a child, and she's no longer a professional runner, but she has returned to racing. So who knows, she's 42 years old, and she said she's running as well as ever. So it's
That's
very
great.
exciting. Yeah. So I know you've had a listen, Elizabeth, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
I thought it was a fantastic episode. I mean, just there was something just really lovely about the two of them talking and you wrapping it up at the start and the finish. And so I really just enjoyed it. And then also I kept on thinking about sort of what Jay says is that it is a skill sport, but it reminds me, all sports are skill sports, and you really get in trouble if you ignore that
Right.
and sort of wing it, which I discovered cross country skiing, but we won't talk about that. But and that's what I really like about sport, is that you can always learn more, you can always get
Right.
more skillful, and there are all these moments to get better. And I just love that she's doing it at sort of an older age. And the other thing I thought about is how sort of these little niggles that we get repeat themselves. And if you ignore them when you're young, they do go away and you can continue, but they're going to crop up later in your life and you're going to eventually have to deal with it. And so, I just thought about that as well.
Yeah, and I do enjoy talking to athletes who have like a longer career and getting into sort of the longevity of sport too, and how things change over time, because it's great to perform super well when you're younger, but it's also super awesome to be able to keep going after things as an older athlete. And so I've gotten very interested in that. And of course, also because I'm 52 years old and I want to keep doing sports
Right.
for many, many years to come. And so I loved that. I just love the detail that Jay got into talking about her own process, because it is so nitty gritty about what she does. And it's anybody who listens to the episode, you're going to hear that like using the Feldenkrais method is it's very different from any other like sort of athletic training that people do. And I've done a lot of Jay's audio lessons in the past, and it really is sort of a bizarre experience when you first start doing it. But yeah, so I just, I loved diving into just that, also that idea of being skillful as a runner, because it's supposed to come so naturally to us. And sometimes it stops coming naturally
Right.
to us in
Right.
the ways that work best for our body. So that's why I was
Well, you
very
make
excited.
you make me think that about, like it doesn't have to be painful. I think when we age, particularly when we age, we think, oh, that pain that I have right now is because I'm old. And I'm finding out more and more that that's not true. It's maybe because you've sort of aged through that pain, and it's just, as I said, it's like a thing that happened when you were young and you would get over it, and now that's not going to happen, so you sort of have to address it. But what your episode shows is that, you can address it, you can get past it, and you can continue running and pain-free and maybe even better than you did before.
Yeah, and I do like you bringing up that point about how we don't have to be in pain. Like a lot of people think of running and they're just like, oh, bad knees, like, oh, it hurts. And it's like, well, you may want to think about how you're running because it really shouldn't feel bad. It should actually feel quite natural and good. And so I do think that's something to come back to for people is like, this shouldn't be a painful endeavor.
Right.
It may be hard, it may be difficult when you start going faster or longer, but it shouldn't have that really negative, painful impact on people. So,
and I should say my own personal experience, because after a while back, you told me about Jay. I listened to a few of her videos, and honestly, I didn't follow through because the idea of rolling around on the floor was a little bit much for me at the point. But I listened to them and sort of adopted some of the thoughts about, keeping your pelvis looser, and immediately my running got better. So it's definitely, as soon as the weather is better and I can start running a little bit more, I am going to get into it more deeply.
Yeah, and that keeping your pelvis loose is one I think resonates with, or it impacts so many people very, very strongly. I know that was my big takeaway. Sonia talks about in the episode how that was her big takeaway. Is it's just like letting your letting your abs hang, and not keeping them all sucked in, and letting your hips rotate, and yeah, that's a big one for many, many people. So moving on to sort of the meatier part of this week's episode, where we talk about something in women's sports media that we're particularly interested in, I wanted to talk about Siren, which is a women's sports collective out of Australia, and an agreement they made with their national broadcaster, ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, not ABC like we might know it in the States, and how ABC is working together with Siren to have Siren write stories for their sports section. And I just love the fact of this. It was really, they started this agreement last year. It's going for a year. And it is part of this larger project that ABC has adopted that originally started with the BBC, and it's called 50/50, the Equality Project. And it is to make news more equal. And it's starting out with gender equality and then also moving into equity amongst all voices. And so diversity and, across cultures and, people from different places and people with different attitudes and viewpoints. But anyway, so it's specifically been taken on by ABC in their sports section. And they're working with this great organization, Siren. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Elizabeth. I have a few thoughts that I'll share, but I'll ask you what you think about it.
Well, first of all, it was awesome. I mean, Siren is awesome, and that ABC is taking this on is really awesome. And, my first reaction was, it's really simple. All you got to do is make a decision. Somebody at the top has to make the decision, like, yes, we want equity. And then you sort of dissect it and figure out how to do it. And then you go about doing it. I think people like you and like me, we're not expecting this to happen overnight. I would like the decision to be made overnight.
Yeah.
I understand that the implementation isn't going to happen overnight. So that was my first reaction.
Yeah. And what I really thought was just so smart is that ABC, instead of saying like, we're going to hire women under our umbrella and we're going to, have them write for us, and that's how we're going to find equity. They went to an organization that's already doing it and doing it really well and said, hey, we want to bring you guys on board because you're the experts. And so that's what they're doing. And they explicitly said in their press materials about this, ABC's, that part of what they wanted to do was grow their women's audience. And I just thought, yes, exactly. Like, you're going to get more women reading your sports section if you address things that are of interest to them. And of course, I'm not just saying that women only want to read about other women, but it would certainly help. And so, yeah, I thought this was just such a smart move all the way around. The other thing I really like about Siren is they had a program where they offered up some help to new writers. So women who are entering the sports writing space and sort of mentoring them along. And they have this program that they did. And that is part of this ABC agreement as well, is to help usher in new voices, not only to Siren, but also on this bigger scale. So it's also smart in that regard, where they're bringing more women into the fold who aren't already in this space. I
So
love the
important.
whole thing.
Yeah. I want to read something that was on the ABC website about what it is, the 50/50 Project. And they
Right.
said that there are two main facets of the 50/50 Project. Firstly, working to increase the contribution of women as expert talent and contributors across the programming. And this is a part I wanted to highlight. Secondly, developing and commissioning more content that women find relevant and interesting. There is no such thing as a women's story, that's in quotes, but we are working to deliver more stories that prioritize women's experiences and perspectives. And this is something that you and I talk about a lot. It's like, what is it actually that women want to hear in sports stories or in any stories? And I think it's fantastic that they've recognized that, and they know that they don't know the answer yet, but they're going to find it out by doing this work.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's a bit of a power shift, right? It's like they're handing over power to somebody else who knows this. And it's just like, it feels very respectful. It just feels like such a great step. And it was funny, before I started diving into this, I had actually thought about, there's like Just Women's Sports in the United States, and they're doing a really great job with coverage of a lot of women's sports here. And I was thinking, like, I wonder if they're going to get absorbed by some bigger media entity, because they're developing an expertise that these people want. And yeah, so I'd love to see this happen in other places, where people aren't trying to filter women writers or non-women writers into talking about women's sports under their umbrella, kind of crunching it through like whatever the ESPN model, or the ABC Sports in the United States model, or the Sports Illustrated model, that they're allowing somebody else's model to drive the ship, so to speak. So, yeah.
I thought it was also interesting that the way that they're counting it is based on the interviewees and contributors. So, basically people that they bring on to tell a story have to be 50/50 gender-wise. And I think that's super interesting, because as we all know, that we tend to hire people or look for people who are like us. And so that's why sort of this male-dominated system perpetuates itself. Right. And now sort of typically the people in power are having to do the work to actually go out and find a little more diversity for their stories. And even just that process is super fantastic, that they're doing it and they're understanding that the work is required. But the people are there, the expertise is out there. It's, they're not having to lower their quality or, lower their standards. It's just that they may have to work a little harder because they're just not used to it.
Yeah, they haven't developed that relationship yet.
Correct.
So they're being asked to go develop those relationships. Yeah, there was something else that was highlighted on the ABC website in those regards, that like our sources will always be the right people for the story. We're not just going to put any person in there because they fit some sort of mold. It's like our first priority is quality reporting, but we know that those experts are out there. Like, to me, that's what they're saying, is like, we know those people are out there that are appropriate and the right person to go to. We just haven't found them yet. Right. So I thought, I agree. I just think that was, it makes me happy. And I really wanted to bring some happy news to this subject that can get pretty depressing and frustrating. And the other thing too, is that I do like looking outside of the United States, because there are people who are doing things in other ways that I think we could really learn from. So I'm just super excited. And the Siren Network is great. They have a podcast, they have a weekly newsletter, they have, their own media outlet as their website, which of course we're going to link to. But yeah, they're a great group and doing really good work.
Yeah.
Did you have any other comments to add about that?
No, none other than I signed up for the newsletter and I'm following the podcast now for Sirens.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and again, I really just, really just wanted to bring the fact of it, out to a broader audience, because I'm just so excited by the whole thing. So,
and I should point out that this happened pretty recently. I mean, the project started in 2019. So, I mean, they're still working on it. I went to the website and they're certainly not 50-50 yet, but they're working on it. I love it.
Right. And this agreement specifically with the sports side of things with Siren actually started in August of last year, and they're giving it a whole year. Which is another smart part of it. Like this stuff, it takes time to develop. So a year seems like a pretty good amount of time where they can step back and take a look at, how things have changed, what their audience growth may or may not have been. It's a good long enough period of time to see, what kind of movement they're getting. So, yeah. Well, Elizabeth, I think that's a wrap for this week.
Awesome.
Yes. So I will sign off by saying I am Cherie Louise Turner of Strides Forward.
And I am Elizabeth Emery from Hear Her Sports.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.